G'day and welcome back to the channel. It's time for another trip down memory lane for some of us and an eye-opening look at what the hobby was like almost half a century ago. Yes, March 1970. This is Radio Modeler. It was a UK magazine and I used to get every edition way back because it was full of really good stuff about the hobby. But this one is nearly it's 49 years old, this edition in March, so 49 years exactly. And let's look how things have changed in the period of almost half a century. And the first thing you'll notice on the front page of this magazine is this box. And it is a radio control transmitter, but look, it only has a button. How on earth did that work? Well, I'll tell you a bit about that later on, but here's something a little more familiar. It's a 4-channel radio, well, it's a 5-channel. Look, it's got a slider in the middle. It's a radio control system, proportional, 2 sticks, and an antenna, old long wire, of course. And look, here we have a coil. There's a coil in the middle of the antenna. That's a center loading coil. This was one of the methods that was used to try and get more range out of radio gear because things back then, they just didn't work quite as well. So quite often the antenna would have a coil in the middle of it to make it look longer to the radio. So you'd hopefully get more range, more signal strength out of it, and a better radiation pattern so there weren't big nulls and things. And here's something here. Now this transmitter, you'll notice these are single axis stick units. I don't know if you can see, probably can't see too well in the video here, but I'll try and get a better picture inside perhaps of something like this. But it's a Gem 2, mainstream Gem 2, and it has one stick on the left that goes up and down and a stick on the right that goes from side to side. They're only single axis sticks, and that's why a lot of people, including myself, fly mode 1, where we have our throttle on the right hand side and our elevator on the left hand side, because we were used to dealing with a situation where we had ailerons on this stick, or rudder on this stick, and elevator on that stick. We only had 2 channels, so they had to be our primary flight controls, which were our turn control and our pitch control. So we learned to fly with the pitch and the turn split onto different sticks. And so when these came out with more advanced dual stick units, we simply just transferred that across. Of course, these days, everyone starts with a dual axis stick unit, so you put the pitch and the roll on the one stick, and that's mode 2. But back in the day, we had to use things like this, and so we learned to fly mode 1. And further proof of how old this is, look, 3 and 6, 3 shillings and 6pence. It's before decimal currency. How long ago was that? Now, actually in Australia and New Zealand, I think decimal currency came in the 60s. But in the UK, they held out. They were, they wanted to stick to good old pounds, shillings and pence, and that's the way they did it. Rightio, here we go. Let's have a look at inside the pages of this thing. I'll just pull out a little bit so we can get the whole thing in its total juicy goodness. Here we go. Another one of those single channel radio control units. And these are the kind of models we built. See, not very pretty, is it? This is a tipsy nipper. I think it might be a scale model of a full size, but back then things were a lot different. 172, but these were all Veron. Veron was a big kit maker. I had lots of Veron planes. I had a Veron Deacon, a Veron Cardinal, a Veron Bombat, all sorts of models. They came basically sticks of balsa in a box, and you glued them all together over a plan, and then you put covering on them and you flew them. It's great. It was actually a really big part of the hobby. It was actually building your models. It doesn't happen too much these days. Let me just, no, that's all right. It doesn't happen too much these days because we have the situation with ARF. So I'm just going to change the exposure a bit here so we don't get too much blooming. There we go. We had to build them. Couldn't buy them really, but you could, but they were very expensive, and there was only a very few fully built models available, usually from specialty shops. People that had hobby shops, and they would build models to spec for customers, but there wasn't a big market for ready-built models back then. And here at Staveley, this was one of the UK brands. I don't know if they were any good. I never had one, but there were a lot of small UK companies, boutique radio control companies. You'll probably see it as we go through this magazine. Different companies in the UK, probably just little backroom operations where they had a model shop or something, or they had an interest in electronics and they were in the hobby, so they decided to make a run of radio control units. And here's one of those single axis stick units again. You remember we had roll on here and pitch on here, and that's the way, and throttle would be in that one up in the middle there. So this was way back, and that's an RS Navigator. Again, Roland Scott, this is a build it yourself. This was a kit. There were also a lot of kit radios because these things were so damn expensive that it was much easier just to put all the bits in a bag and send them off and get people to put them together themselves, and they did. So that's what happened. And because we're working with Balsa all the time, these tools, X-Acto, they were the #1 tool maker for modelling knives, little razor planes, little saws for cutting your balsa wood, and oh look, Keelcraft. This was another big kit maker. Keelcraft Super 60. That was one of the most popular models on the planet at one stage. And I never had one. But I'd have loved one, but I couldn't afford one. Never mind. Keelcraft Handbook. Those little magazines came out long before the interwebs when you had to actually buy stuff written on paper, hence the presence of this magazine. Okay, so let's turn over. Oh yes, here we go again. Now this was Mainstream, this was a UK company. Ultimately they went bankrupt, and I know they went bankrupt because I had one of their radio control systems, and I was unfortunate enough that I had a credit with the store when it went bankrupt. So I lost all my money. Well, it was only a few pounds, but this was when I bought my very first radio control system, well one of my very first, which was a Mainstream Gem, which was one of these single channel units. It was actually before the model before this one. It was just a little tin box with a button on it. And I had some money left, and I thought, I shall buy some crystals, change the frequency, get some new crystals. So I sent off my letter, because we didn't have email in those days, and I got a letter back from the liquidator saying, I'm sorry, but the company has been wound up, and you are just an unsecured creditor, tough cheese. So that was the end of that. But anyway, I struggled on. So yeah, Mainstream was made by a UK company, but I think Simprop was a European, and they did a sort of a, well, maybe I'm not sure, maybe I'm getting confused. But anyway, Simprop was the digital proportional arm of the business. And yeah, Gem was the budget end, Simprop was the top end. But it was another one of those little boutique UK companies, and they didn't all, well, very few of them have lasted the test of time. In fact, there's probably none of them around now. And Sky Leader, another boutique name of radios. They were actually very popular. They sold a lot of stuff. There was a lot of Sky Leader stuff around in the Antipodes, yeah, down under. We had a lot of that gear laying around. People bought it, imported it into the country. So yeah, there was a lot of Sky Leader. It was pretty good gear for the era. Ripmax, that's a name that's been around for a long, long time. And again, they had kits. There was no ARFs. It was all kits, deluxe kits. Woohoo! And these things all look quite different to what we've got today. Most of them like, fairly boxy, but we had some scale models. Here's another do-it-yourself DIY kit set radio control system, the Peacon Digital. And again, little tiny company, proportional electronic controls, Peacon. And Tunbridge Wells. And so here's all the individual components listed at the prices. So it was still pretty expensive, but you could build a 4-function digital proportional outfit for under £92. I don't know what that is in modern dollars, but if you add 50 years to it, it's probably like maybe $1,000 in modern money. I don't know. It's a lot of money back then. That's why we had to build them, because you just couldn't afford to buy them a lot of the time. And here we go, Remcom. Another big name. There's so much radio gear. These days, when you get a magazine or you go online, you've got Free Sky Futaba, Spectrum. Basically, that's it, isn't it? There's not a lot else in the radio market, but these days, it was all sorts of things. And here, look at this one. This has got little switches, little toggle switches. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 little toggle switches. This was what we call reeds. This was a reed system. Now, these were really, they were sort of a first multi-channel radios you could get, really. And what they did was each of these little switches triggered an oscillator, an audio oscillator inside the transmitter. That made an audio tone that was transmitted out the antenna, and each channel had its own tone. And so there was a tone for left rudder, a tone for right rudder, a tone for up elevator, a tone for down elevator. So all these different tones produced different results. At the receiver, we had a receiver, and it had actually a mechanical tone filter, which was a little metal plate with different fingers cut to different lengths, and they would vibrate at different frequencies. So when you go, for example, up elevator, you pulled back on the elevator thing, it was all or nothing. There was no proportionality to it. It was just up elevator or neutral. So you pulled back on the elevator switch, it would send the tone for up elevator, and the little mechanical arm that resonated at that particular frequency would resonate, and that would close a switch, which would cause the servo to go to its full throw, and you had up elevator. So flying these things was really kind of brilliant. You had to, if you wanted to fly smoothly, you had to actually sort of just tap the switches and modulate them by hand, just tap, 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 just to give a little bit, because the servos were so slow, then the servo would only go a little bit, then it would come back, go a little bit. So it would be like putting a little bit of elevator in. But man, some people with this gear, you would not believe how well they flew with this really, really sort of basic equipment. But reeds, in 1970, reeds were on the way out. They'd been around for quite a while. They were cheaper than proportional. But reeds are on, this is a 34-pound radio system. And if you look over here, just over here, the 37 pounds for proportional. So proportional is still more expensive, but it was, I think this included a receiver. Yeah, for manual receiver, I don't know. Yeah, so 18 plus 9 is that 30, I have no idea. Anyway, but digital proportional was more expensive. So People still used reeds because it was cheaper. But this is all kit set stuff again, all the parts to build. So it is not ready built, ready to go. You've still got to build the damn things. And, you know, so 6-channel transmitter and receiver, including DX, 57 pounds. So that was quite a bit more than the 39 pounds. These reed radios, every function like rudder, it required 2 channels. 1 channel to go left, 1 channel to go right. So when you got a Quantum 6, if it was a 6-channel radio system, it actually only had 3 usable functions because each channel required, or each function required 2 channels. So yeah, this is great stuff. This is way back, isn't it? Oh, so much fun. Okay, I don't know who this is. Completer Pack. Obviously Scottish, they make kits, I suppose, but I'm not familiar with them at all. Here's another look. Simple Tone, Supertone. This is another single channel system. It has a button. It has a button on it. And how did these work? Well, you had a servo or an escapement in your model, and to make the model turn right, you pushed the button. Isn't that simple? As soon as you push the button, the rudder would go hard over, and the model would start to turn. If you didn't release the button in time, it would go into a spiral dive and crash into the ground. So that was good. That's how you turned right, but how do you turn left? Well, there were 2 methods. There was the sequential and selective. With the sequential system, when you pushed the button, the rudder would go to the right and the plane would start turning right. Then when you release the button, the rudder would go back to the neutral position. The next time you pushed the button, the rudder would go to the left. So alternately, you'd get sequentially left and right rudder. So if you wanted to keep turning right, you would push the button, hold it down till the plane started to turn, then release it, then press it very quickly just to skip the going left, so the rudder would flick off to the left and come back, and then you'd press it and hold it again for right. So you'd have to sort of bypass on every second press of the button the turn you didn't want. But then they came out with selective, and that was so much better because you would press the button once and hold it to turn right, and then you'd press it quickly and then release it and press it again. So 2 presses would give you left rudder, 1 press for right, 2 presses for left. How good is that? And then of course they even got better, so you'd have 3 presses for throttle or quick blip for throttle. So there's all sorts of clever little things they did to try and extend the functionality of these really simple boxes with a button. And that was how we flew back in the day. Oh. So, and then of course here's a digital control system, Telequad. Woo! It's 59 pounds as a kit. Again, kits, all these kits. These really were the days of electronics when people could actually do things. Oh look, Flightlink, they were another UK company. And this looks like one of the Terry Anderson characters, the people that did Thunderbirds and all the other stuff. Does it say Royal Exhibition, blah, 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 blah. No, I don't see it there. It's a full walking, talking robot. Well, I didn't have one of those. And I still don't have one of those. I don't really want one. But this was obviously a use for the Flightlink radio equipment. Again, because they were a very small company, they just made stuff bespoke to spec. When someone said, I need a radio control system for my blow-up doll, that's what they would make them. And here we have Henry J. Nichols and Son. That's a big name. I don't know if they're still going. No idea at all, but they were a big model shop. And of course, they had the pages and the thing. What have we got here? We've got Stavely again, Simprop again, so the same manufacturers appearing in there. And mufflers for glow motors. Who would have thought? That's not a thing anymore, is it? Oh, and this was it. There were a number of publishers had plan books. There was MAP, I think they did Aero Modeler and radio control models and electronics. And then there was Radio Modeler. So this was where you'd buy the plan book, you'd browse through and say, I want to build this plane. And then you'd order the plans, and the plans would come, and then you'd put them on your bench, and you'd buy the balsa wood and build it from a plan. I don't think many people do that these days, certainly not young people coming into the hobby. But yeah. And this is the sort of plan you'd get. This is what a plan looked like. It was just line drawings, and where you'd go from there, cut the ribs out. And here's a typical model. This is Pete Malone's slimline multi-quick build, and so economical. Yes, it looks like it's a little low-wing pattern ship. And it's for, he's converting to Propo from reeds by the look of it. That's amazing. Anyway, so I'm not going to go into too much depth on that, but they did often give you the little small plan. Then you could order the full-size plan, as I said, which came separately, and then you built to that. Now notice black and white. This is, even for magazines, this is old school. It's all black and white except for the cover. A little bit of, that's the rest of the build on that particular model. It looks very nice. Quantum 70. Now this, again, this was the era. It was a brilliant era from the perspective that you could build so much stuff because everything was very simple. It was very basic. The electronics was all transistorized. There was no fancy spread spectrum, super diddly squat things that, required a degree in science to understand. It was simple. This is the super selective receiver for the Quantum 6. And here is, there's the circuit board layout. It wasn't that big. This is magnified, of course. But look at all the individual components, and they were all what we call through-hole components. So they actually went through holes on the board and they stood up on their ends. So when you had a crash, everything laid over and broke. Not very robust compared to modern stuff. But all the component lists even tell you what the colours of the resistors are and little wiring diagrams. And so it was within the grasp of most modelers to build these things. Here we go, good example. See, all these components standing on their ends. So when you had a crash, the G-forces would just bend them all over and rip the bottom out of the resistors. It would wreck the coils. The crystal, this piece here, would often get smashed to pieces because they were standing up prone and the G-forces just wrecked them. So. And look at the number of components, look at the size of the damn thing, huge. But that's what we did. And because everything was bigger, it was fairly easy to build this stuff yourself. You didn't have to be a super good solderer. And look, a circuit diagram, a schematic as the Americans call it because they don't understand English. And all the transistors and the bits and pieces. So this wasn't super secret source stuff. It wasn't all proprietary. This was just stuff that people had designed and basically put in the public domain. And well, I think it was public domain. You could just work from that schematic if you wanted to. Build your own radio control set. And moving on, Matters Marine. And I notice a lot of these older magazines, they had not just model aircraft, but they had cars and boats and all sorts of things. As long as it was remotely controlled, it was a good candidate for the magazine. So here's something about boats. I was never really into boats. I can't swim, so that's probably why. What have we got here? Subject for scale. Yeah, they used to do this when people scratch-built their own models and designed them up out of plans and everything. Quite often they'd put a full-size aircraft in the magazine so that if you were thinking, I could build a model of that. So here's the drawings, and people would then carefully draw out their own plans and build a full-size model based on the scale drawings given in the magazine. It was great. And scale was quite a big thing. What do we got here? Ready references, I don't know what that is. Oh, soarers, gliding was quite big, and slope soaring was big. I don't see much in the way of slope soaring these days. Maybe it's because I don't live near hills, but it just doesn't seem to be quite the following that it used to have. Slope soaring used to be, all I did was slope soaring for many years because I just loved it so much. And here's another model, readers' letters. Remember before we had forums and things? You could actually write to a magazine and they'd publish your letter. Look at that. But now, of course, the internet's taken over all the different forums and groups and things, that's all taken care of. You can say whatever you like and nobody will listen. A diesel engine, look at that, diesel, compression ignition. No, these don't run on diesel as you buy at the gas station. These run on a blend of ether, kerosene and oil. Now the ether is there because it has a very low combustion temperature under pressure. So that enabled the fuel to burn. If you just put diesel in these, they won't run because it doesn't get enough pressure inside the cylinder to cause it to ignite. So they put ether in there as an ignition agent. And most of the energy actually came from the kerosene or the paraffin or whatever you want to call it. That was part of the fuel. So yeah, these were very popular diesel engines, especially in the UK. For some reason, the Americans loved glow engines and the the English people loved their diesels. And since I was living in a country where the English influence was very strong, we had a lot of diesel engines. And so we didn't have to worry about glow starter batteries going flat or anything, but these were not as easy to start as a glow plug motor. And they were generally a bit heavier, and they didn't. If you had an RC one, it didn't throttle very well. So yeah, times changed, but that was back in the old days. Here's another one: a Johnson Electronics radio system. Again, another boutique manufacturer. Here's the what's new: mufflers, engine mounts, retracts. They were big news back then. Not many people had retracts on their models. And as I say, RC cars. This was part of the radio control thing. These days, of course, RC cars have their own magazines and websites and things, and they're quite separated from the model aircraft. Stavely. Oh, here's a good example. This is Stavely. This is the company that makes one of these boutique companies. That's the staff. There's the radio gear. There is the high-tech factory where these are put together. So there's a couple of people on a bench soldering bits of wire on a board, and there's someone with a Marconi, looks like a Marconi signal tester, just checking them up, aligning the receivers, and away you go. And this was all you needed to be a major force in the radio control business back in the day. And another RC boat. There we go, 5cc engines. Ooh, back in the day when things are measured in cc's or cubic inches rather than watts. Again, plans. When you get the full-size plans, just available for post-paid from Radio Modeler. So this was a marketing thing. Buy our plans, buy our plans. That would never happen today. There'd never be any covert marketing involved in the hobby, I'm sure. And there's an affiliate link in my description. Blah blah blah. Right, hang on a minute. God. Turn the page. So there we go, wake and splash and whatever, great. This was actually quite a good thing. Basically, the clubs could send in little fragments of their newsletters and they get published in the thing. Irrelevant these days, because every club can have its own website and publish directly to the world. But back in the day, before the interwebs, if you wanted to reach a wider audience, these magazines were the only way to do it. And trophies, oh, I've got so many of those, not. This is where the advertising gets cheaper, it's not full page, but here's World Engines. I mean, they sold radio gear and servos and stuff. What, Isle of Man Soarin', I wonder if that's still an event. And then, this was the backbone of a lot of magazines in all sectors of the publishing industry, classified advertising, because you couldn't just go on eBay or Craigslist or anything like that and list the stuff you wanted to buy or sell, because it didn't exist, so you had to put an ad in a magazine. So you'd pay so much for a little space in here, just like newspapers used to, and there was all your stuff wanted to buy and sell. Interesting, there was other areas too, because the publishers probably had fingers in other pots. We've got photography, full-size gliding, personal, ooh, man with glider wishes to meet woman with hill, yes, something like that. And again, shop directory, just little shops, put their little ads in here. It was a great money spinner for the magazines. It was a real major source of revenue. And of course that all died out. Once the internet came along, the magazines can't charge for that anymore because no one will use it. Oh, look at that. RC Modeler advertising in this magazine. Reynolds Components, there we go, because the building your own radio gear was such a thing, even a component supplier advertising in this magazine. Oh, look, ready-made models. You know, I said you couldn't buy many ready-made models. Well, prove me wrong, look at all these. You could buy all these ready-made models, but they were quite cheap too, although given inflation, I dare say they'd cost a lot more today. Here we go, MFA, they were another big name in the hobby back in the day, MFA Model Flight Accessories, and this is the typical sort of low-wing pattern model of the day. And there's that Johnson digital proportional again, 139 pounds, my goodness, that's a huge amount of money in today's dollars. Radio Constructor. Again, the people who were reading this magazine probably had a lot of interest in electronics, as you can see by the level of do-it-yourself projects and things in here. So the publishers obviously just including one of their other magazines in here, giving it a bit of a plug. And of course, no modelling magazine from this era would be complete without an ad for balsa wood. Solabo balsa wood. In fact, you know, they were one of the major balsa suppliers. Here we go, Horizon. It's not the Horizon in the USA, different company, I think. I don't think that's Horizon USA at all. So you could buy stick units for building your own gear and servos and blah, blah. And Digifleet, another manufacturer down here. Is that a kit? No, that seems to be built up, £135. See why you want to build it. When it's £135 to buy it built up, and you can buy the kits for like £39 or something, yeah, much better. Kraft, American readers will recognise this name. Kraft was an early innovator with RC systems in the USA, and obviously they were imported and sold in the UK. But look at the price. 6 channels, £224. That's probably a couple of grand in today's money. And it was just 6 channels. It wasn't computed, it was just 6 basic channels, you know, 2 2-axis stick units, probably a couple of sliders or a couple of switches, and that's it. No dual rates, no expo, nothing else, just basic 4-channel stuff. Huge price, absolutely huge. All right. Aren't you glad you weren't trying to fly models back then? Oh, and here we go. Now this is good, I like this. McGregor Kodamatic transmitter. Now remember I said that they had, you saw transmitters with buttons on it, right? And you press it once to go right, twice to go left. Well, McGregor came up with this idea, that's way too hard, people can't count that high. So they built a single channel transmitter with a little stick unit. So when you push the stick to the right, it automatically was the same as pressing the button once. And when you push the stick to the left, it was the same as pushing the button twice. So you didn't have to push a button, you could move a stick, and it was almost like having reeds because you had left or right, quite selective. However, if you're a bit quick on the stick, it would get confused. But McGregor made some pretty nice kit, I've got to say. The transmitter's nice, brushed aluminium, plastic side panels. In the day, they were quite a prestigious brand, and you know, the receivers were very small for the era. And I knew a few people who had McGregor stuff. It was really, really nice. I really lusted after their radio gear, but then they decided there was no money in making your own gear, so they started importing and selling JR equipment in the UK. So they become the JR distributors. I don't know what the story is now because I haven't kept up with that, but there you go. McGregor, again, another UK brand. Irvine Engines, K&B and Veco importers. Look at that. Veco and K&B, I'm sure a lot of Americans will remember those famous brands. And this was the magazine that was, the ad that was always in the back of the magazines. RCS, Radio Control Supplies. Now, they had a lot of their own branded radio equipment. And they had single channel, see, RCS guidance system with the one button over there. They had reeds, that's a reed system there with the little switches along the sides. Then they had a single stick proportional, and they had the RCS 6, I think it was. RCS, I can't read from here, but they had the full proportional. However, they were a bit on the cheapy side because I had one of these radios, even though I flew mode 1, but I bought one of those because I got really cheap, so I thought I'll just get it anyway. And they have trims on the stick units, but what the trim did, and this was really crazy, when you moved the trim lever, it actually moved the center position of the stick. So when you gave it left trim, the stick would move to the left. The center point of the stick would move to the left. They were called mechanical trims, and they were terrible. So it limited the amount of throw you had on your servo because you'd use some of it up changing the center point. Absolutely terrible things, but hey, how much were they? That was £117 with 2 servos. Why would you buy a 6-channel radio with 2 servos? Because it was so expensive. You really had to watch your pennies. And sometimes, after you'd bought the transmitter and receiver, you could only afford 2 servos. So you'd build a glider and think, why on earth did I waste my money on a 6-channel unit? So that's pretty much it. What are we going to, oh, there we go. There is the single channel RCS guidance, single channel radio control system. There's the El Cheapo button, fantastic logo. And this was in that, was a silvery coloured paint that you put on, and it looked like it was slightly dimpled. It was very popular back in the late 60s. I forget what it's called. It's been peened with a hammer. It was fantastic. So it was like an industrial conduit case that they put a switch and a button on and an antenna at the top. Absolutely brilliant. And one thing we'll probably notice is, does it have a Super Gen receiver? Because back then, receivers, transistor, stabilized, operation, I don't know. Oh yes, Super Gen version. Now this is something modern flyers probably don't even know about. Back in the day, you probably realised we had long wire and you had to have a separate crystal for every frequency, so you could only fly one person on a frequency at a time. So before you went flying, you had to make sure no one was using your frequency. And initially, in the 27 megahertz band, I think there were 6 or 7 or 8 channels. I can't remember, to be honest. There was brown, red, orange, yellow, green, blue. Yeah, I think so, whatever that comes to. So they were identified by colour, but the super heterodyne receiver, superhet, they were quite expensive. How much was the superhet one? I don't know, I can't see the prices, but yeah, superhet receivers were expensive. They enabled you to fly, if there were 6 channels, 6 frequencies, 6 people could fly at once. Super Regen was the El Cheapo budget option. I had Super Regen receiver. The problem was Super Regen receivers not very selective, so you couldn't fly when anyone else was flying, because anyone, even on other channels, would interfere with the receiver because it was very non-selective. It would listen to the whole band, so you had to make sure you were the only person flying if you had a super regenerative receiver. So you had to get to the field really early and get your flights in before other people turned up. Otherwise, it was very hard to get a flight because there was always someone else in the air. So yeah, the good old days, 50 years of progress. Isn't it wonderful? My goodness. In some aspects, it's great looking back, as I've said in a previous video. Rose-tinted glasses. It all seemed better when you look back at it. But I remember the days of frustration dealing with this unreliable, very poor performing radio equipment. I had so many near flyaways with my single channel stuff because it just didn't have the range. And then sometimes the little escapements or servos that controlled the rudder, sometimes they would stick. And so you'd go into a spiral dive from a great height and the model would shatter into a million pieces onto the ground below. So yeah, there were downsides. Modern gear, far more reliable, far better range, much, much cheaper. But hey, we persisted despite all the impediments to enjoying the hobby. And they were good days. Lots of people, and lots of young people at the flying field. That was the main thing. I was one of many young people. In fact, I think probably I started when I was 8 or 9 going to the flying field. And there were grey-haired people there then. And there was, right across from my age through to, nearly dead in a hole, there were people there of all different ages at the flying field. It just doesn't happen today, unfortunately. Never mind. That's something for another video, which I've already done. But thank you for watching. Now, if you are of the same generation as me, this stuff will be familiar and probably spark a lot of memory, especially if you lived in the UK when all this stuff came from. So share your thoughts, share your memories, share your perspectives on these half a century ago years, and tell us the fun you had, the problems you had, and what you used and so forth in the comments section down here below the video. And if you're a newbie, if you're a young fella or you just got into the hobby, can you really imagine flying this kind of stuff and paying these kind of prices? Isn't it gobsmacking how things have changed? So there you go. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Another one of my nostalgia videos. I don't do them often, but I think they're probably worth doing. If you're not a subscriber, subscribe. There's so much stuff on this channel. Browse the back catalogue. There's bound to be something that will piss you off if you look hard enough. And there you go. Thanks for watching.